I was reading a book the other day about a high schooler who got possessed, and there was a funny little bit about Ouija boards in it. While spending the night at a friend's cottage, 4 girls discussed the prospect of using a Ouija board while under the influence of a particular substance. Probably not a good idea, but if we're talking about good ways to kick off demonic stories, this is one of them. However, one pal brings up the fact that Ouija boards are made by Hasbro, and if you really want to see some demons, you should brush your teeth. And what she means by this is that Procter & Gamble, the company behind Crest toothpaste, had a logo at the time that depicts an arguably satanic image, complete with 666 and a devilish horn. So if this list convinces you to avoid summoning specific Ouija board demons, maybe check your toothpaste for presences before polishing those pearly whites. What a world, right? So here we go, the top 5 Ouija board demons. You should never summon, part 2. Coming in at number 5, the Undead Witch. Generally speaking, you should avoid undead witches. The living ones can be reasoned with and are often quite pleasant to converse with, even if you yourself are not a follower of Wicca. The ones who perished and through some dark magic managed to make it back to the realm of the living, those are the ones you gotta watch out for. Nobody wants to be at the receiving end of a hex or spell cast by a practitioner of magic who has returned from the grave. No thank you. An unfortunate cohort of Ouija using pals accidentally summoned one though, and the results were less than pretty. After procuring a Ouija board through some pretty standard methods, a guy named Justin and his pals decided to have a little seance, all in good fun of course. Fun is just how those things start though, and it quickly took a turn for the worse. The friends open up the session and begin to ask questions of the presence they had summoned. At first there was no response, but the intrepid paranormal enthusiasts pressed on dauntless, looking for some sort of message from the other side. Then the planchette started moving. Slowly at first, it swayed back and forth between the 4 corners of the board, picking up speed as it went. Soon it was just doing quick laps around the board. The circle shifted and undulated as the planchette began drawing out new shapes on the surface, freaking everyone out. They called it off, closed the circle, and decided to do something else. However, when Justin tried the board again, this time with a different friend, the results were the same, a slowly shifting planchette eventually reaching a fever pitch. After that second experience, he started to notice strange things happening. He would wake up in the middle of the night with the sensation of someone grabbing his arm. His pals that participated in the paranormal practice reported similar events. Looking into it, they discovered that this experience could have endowed them with a hex. From beyond the grave, this witch decided to weave some spells and made some mischief. Hopefully the folks on the receiving end are okay now. Coming in at number 4, close the circle. Now, this is just good advice for anyone interested in Ouija. Make sure that you fully understand the ritual before going in and performing it. Walking in half prepared will always end in disaster, so do not wing it. Read up on the process, ensure you understand what must be done, and for goodness sakes, make sure to close the ritual at the end. You can do everything else right, from starting with a good mindset, to being polite and patient with your summoned spirit, to refraining from asking for physical signs that they are present. But if you don't move the planchette to goodbye at the end of the session, whatever presence you've brought into your home is liable to stick around and experience most foul. Some will be friendly, amicable spirits from the great beyond, willing to interact and leave without any trouble. But you can't believe everything a spirit tells you on a Ouija board, and many times demons will appear under the guise of a good-natured individual. This is where things can get dangerous. Take poor Vince, who once used a Ouija board as a child. He and his brothers managed to summon a Russian spirit who claimed to have been murdered in cold blood. A classic origin story for sure. But after they stopped communicating, the brothers decided to go get some food, without closing the circle. When they returned to the basement, the energy had noticeably shifted. A dark, heavy presence was here, and things were not as they were. Books and toys had been flung around the room in a whirlwind, but the Ouija board still sat in the middle, undisturbed. Apparently, when Vince looked into the mirror in the basement, he noticed that the eye on the Ouija board was looking around the room, as if searching for something. The brothers moved the planchette to goodbye and resolved never to do that again. Coming in at number 3, we've got a Scorched Corpse. Could be Freddy Krueger, could be someone else. I'd rather not take that risk though. It seems that whenever kids spend the night somewhere unfamiliar, they witness unexplainable phenomena. The result of overactive imaginations perhaps? Or is there something to these visions of the paranormal? Well, you could ask those who decided that a sleepover in an old school gym was a good idea what they saw. Christy and her soccer team had set up for an overnight stay at the school gym. Sleeping bags, snacks, scary stories, you name it. But someone brought a Ouija board, and that could not be resisted. The teammates gathered together and started the ritual, seeing if anyone from the school's history would show up. When they finally made contact with somebody, it spelled out words like thirst, and fire, and help. Then the spirit moved the planchette to goodbye, and that was that. They asked around the next day and discovered something disturbing. Apparently there had been a fire at this very location a long time ago, burning the building to the ground. Could it be that a poor, unfortunate soul was trapped in this inferno and now haunts the rebuilt gym? Coming in at number 2, we've got some solo advice. I'll do one more advice column contribution to this Ouija video just to make sure any curious individuals go in knowing as much as they possibly can. Never use a board on your lonesome. Not only is that a goofy, dorky thing to do, it can also be very dangerous. It takes two to tango, and it also takes a duo to draw upon the spirit world. Don't underestimate the power of the paranormal. In many dramatic interpretations of Ouija use, folks who go about it alone end up way worse for wear. Often they'll end up summoning something that will attempt to possess them, emboldened because they're alone. Or sometimes they'll simply be unable to control any aspect of the ritual and see some things that are quite upsetting. One story comes from an individual named Sarah who decided she wanted to contact some spirits in her free time. Unable, or maybe unwilling, to gather some friends in time, she sat down with the board and planchette all alone. This proved to be a very bad call almost immediately as the planchette shot out of her hands and across the room. Needless to say, she did not attempt this again. Another tale comes from Oceana, who similarly wanted to see what spirits were around but refused to gather a group. When she started the ritual, nothing seemed to happen. A little perplexed, she began to clean up, but as she was moving candles, she noticed something quite spooky indeed. The planchette was moving totally on its own with Oceana nowhere near the board. She rushed over and moved it to goodbye and hasn't attempted a seance since. And finally at number 1, we've got summoning sleep paralysis. Most folks looking to dabble in Ouija will find a board and use it somewhere they feel safe, at home or maybe a friend's place. But if you're serious about finding some paranormal activity, notably haunted areas are the place to be. In visiting these locations, you're essentially accepting responsibility for whatever spirits or demons you encounter though. Take Aaron and Arjun, two friends who found a Ouija board and decided to take it to a graveyard. Definitely a place known for harboring spirits and the like. At the graveyard, the duo attempted to summon something and failed, or so they thought. After their uneventful seance, they returned home and went to bed. Late that night, Aaron experienced sleep paralysis for the very first time. Unable to move, he saw a ghostly woman with long black hair slowly floating towards him. Some might chalk that up to a coincidence, or maybe the fact that Aaron was a little spooked from his late night excursion. However, Arjun called up Aaron the next day and told him about an identical experience. The two friends had somehow summoned a spirit that followed them both home and began invading their sleep. Goodness gracious. Whether you're using satanic toothpaste or attempting to communicate with presences beyond our immediate understanding, there's a lot of risk when you dabble in the paranormal. Be careful while investigating things yourself and do your best to research before you go. Otherwise you could end up with a sleep paralysis demon or a hex upon you and your family. So, what'd you think of the list? Do you agree with my picks? Have you ever experienced anything like this? Make sure you let me know down in the comments. Speaking of comments, let's take a look at some of your more sloshy ones from the top 5 SCP monsters that can never escape, part 24. AMB says, don't click weirdly reminds me of the monster at the end of this book. Now that is a throwback. Somehow tying Grover in with the SCP wiki. Good work. James Vance says, I just can't believe it's been 24 episodes for SCPs. Go Keegan go, keep them coming. I can hardly believe it either. Joy Freg says, SCP writer thinks they're clever, making an SCP that meta-references, and they think that's complex. I challenge you to write something more clever then. Have at it. Walter Green says, nice, but why more monster? We always want more monsters, it never ends. And Rodney Kelly says, everyone can argue over what SCP-001 is, I am worried about SCP Infinity. I think we've already experienced SCP Infinity though, because the wiki keeps growing, and it will never stop growing. And that's all the time we have for today. I'm going to take a quick dip in some whitewater rapids. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time. Ready to rock. But if you don't move that planchette to goodbye at the end of the session, okay. Well then. Joy Freg says, SCP writer thinks they're clever, making an SCP that meta-references when they think that's nope, I said that wrong.